The letters on a blueprint don't swim, but the hallways in my father's empire always did. For 20 years, my family treated my spatial disorientation like a mental defect, a shameful secret hidden behind my sister Vivian's flawless Princeton degrees. They called me the broken compass, the daughter who couldn't be trusted to find the exit. But last night, under the suffocating gold chandeliers of the Langham Hotel in Boston, my father publicly stripped me of my name and my inheritance in front of 350 elite guests. He thought he was burying me. He didn't know I had a heavy manila folder tucked into my Zara bag, or that a stranger in a gray suit was walking toward my back table with an envelope from my grandmother Beatrice. She had been watching him from her armchair the whole time. Welcome to Her Dignity Stories, where the quiet daughters finally rewrite the blueprint. Before we take a look at the paperwork that broke the Hayes empire, please take a moment to like and subscribe if you believe in real justice. Drop a comment below and let me know, where are you watching from tonight? And what local time is it over there? Now, let me take you back to the exact room where the ice first settled into my bones. My name is Cassandra Hayes, and I am 28 years old. My brain does not process left from right the way yours does. If you put me in a crowded department store, the walls close in and the exits vanish. Doctors call it severe spatial disorientation. My father, Arthur Hayes, called it a waste of space. I remember being 10 years old at the kitchen table. I was trying to copy a simple floor plan for a school project. The lines kept crossing, and my head started pounding. Arthur walked into the kitchen, his corporate tie undone, smelling like expensive scotch. He looked over my shoulder and yanked the plastic ruler right out of my hand. "It's a straight line, Cassandra," he barked, throwing the ruler onto the table. Even a toddler can read a basic architectural grid. I hid my shaking hands under my thighs. Vivian, who was only 6 then, sat across from me tracing perfect circles on her sketch pad. Arthur patted her head and smiled. "Now look at your sister," he said, his voice instantly turning warm. "She has the Hayes eye." By the time we hit high school, Arthur's obsession with Vivian's genius became a heavy line item in the family budget. He hired a premier urban planning consultant from New York to tutor her for $400 an hour. They sat in the grand study, surrounded by expensive CAD monitors and leather-bound books. I could hear Arthur laughing through the heavy oak doors. "She's going to run the Hayes Infrastructure Group before she's 30, he told our mother, Eleanor, over dinner. Meanwhile, my weekly occupational therapy sessions cost $45 a week. The therapist was teaching me how to navigate the city transit using color-coded landmarks. It was working. I was finally learning how to walk home from the library without panicking. But one Tuesday afternoon, Arthur walked into the kitchen holding my therapy invoice. He slapped the paper down right next to my bowl of cereal. "We are cutting this budget, Cassandra," he said, pouring himself a cup of black coffee. $45 an hour just to teach you how to read a subway map is ridiculous." I looked up at him, my throat tightening. "Bo-oi, it helps me feel safe," I whispered. "The therapist says I'm making real progress." Arthur didn't even look at my face. He just checked his gold Rolex and sighed. "Some children are born to build bridges, and some get lost in their own backyard," he said coldly. "We have to be practical with our investments, and you are a sinking ship." Eleanor just nodded, wiping down the marble counter with a rag. She never looked at me either. My only escape was taking the Red Line subway train to Beacon Hill every Sunday afternoon. I walked up the cracked brick steps to my grandmother Beatrice's apartment. Her place smelled like old paper, wet wool, and hot Earl Grey tea. Arthur hated going there because the historic building didn't have a private parking garage. But to me, it was the only room where I could breathe. Beatrice didn't have Ivy League degrees on her wall, even though she built our entire company from a single trailer in 1968. She would sit in her green velvet armchair, her breathing slow and heavy from age. "Let Arthur play with his expensive software," she told me one rainy Sunday. She reached down and pulled out a stack of dirty, grease-stained blueprints from 1968. They were the original layouts for the Interstate 95 expansion project. "Your father reads a map with his eyes, Cassandra," she said, her weathered, paper-thin hand sliding over mine. "He looks for structural numbers he can manipulate. But your brain is different." She didn't call my condition a defect. She guided my fingers along the heavy ink lines. "Don't look at the grid," she whispered. "Look at the connections. See how the drainage line depends on the slope of the retaining wall? See how the traffic flow responds to the bridge width?" She taught me to read documents and data maps as interconnected systems, not as visual puzzles. Suddenly, the letters stopped swimming. I could see the logic patterns beneath the paper. I could find structural errors that Arthur's top engineers missed during hallway discussions. "You see the bones of things, sweetheart," Beatrice told me, her sharp eyes locking onto mine. "Never let them tell you you are blind just because you don't use their flashlight." On my 18th birthday, right after Arthur refused to buy me a second-hand car because I couldn't handle the highway, I went to Beacon Hill. Beatrice was sitting by the window, her silver hair wispy against the late afternoon light. She didn't offer me cake. Instead, she placed a heavy box on my lap. It was made of dark cedar wood, with an antique brass combination lock built into the front face. The lock had 4 rotating metal dials with scratched numbers. I tried to turn them, but they wouldn't budge. "What's the combination, Grandma?" I asked, tracing the wood grain. Beatrice leaned forward, her grip on my wrist surprisingly tight. "I'm not giving you the code yet. Cassandra," she said softly, "you aren't ready to face what's inside, and neither is Arthur." I stared at her, confused by the sudden drop in her voice. "Then how will I ever open it?" I asked. She smiled, a fierce, knowing look in her eyes. "When the time comes, when your father shows you exactly who he is, you'll know what the code is." I took the cedar box back to my cramped room and hid it under my winter sweaters. I spent the next 10 years trying to earn Arthur's approval anyway. I forgot about the combination entirely, until the day the floor fell out from under me. Christmas 2020 was a brutal turning point. 20 relatives were packed around the long mahogany dining table in my parents' Back Bay townhouse. The room was suffocatingly warm, smelling of pine needles, expensive perfume, and roasting beef. The massive crystal chandelier overhead cast a harsh, bright light on everyone's face. My mother, Eleanor, had hired a private chef to prepare a perfect beef Wellington for the family performance. I sat near the middle of the table, carefully arranging my silverware just to keep my eyes busy. Vivian sat directly across from Arthur, glowing in a new designer silk dress. Arthur stood up at the head of the table, clinking his heavy crystal wine glass with a silver knife. The chatter instantly died out, replaced by a tight, expectant silence. "I have an announcement to make," Arthur said, his corporate boardroom voice filling the room. He paused, letting the tension build for effect. "Vivian has just been accepted into the master's program for urban planning at Princeton," he said proudly. "And she received a full, merit-based scholarship." The room erupted into loud cheers, applause, and the clinking of glasses. My Aunt Catherine patted Vivian's shoulder, and someone yelled, "That's our girl!" Vivian blushed, ducking her head with a well-rehearsed wave of modesty. "My youngest daughter," Arthur continued, his eyes beaming with pure ambition, "is the future of Hayes infrastructure. She is going to take this family business to heights we haven't even dreamed of yet." More applause followed, and people began digging into their food. The pastry on my beef Wellington suddenly felt like cardboard in my mouth. Then, Arthur's eyes drifted down the long table. The warmth in his expression completely vanished as his gaze landed on my face. And, well, Cassandra is also here, he said flatly. He didn't mention my name with pride. He didn't mention that I had just spent 3 weeks helping the company archivist sort through 40 years of disorganized tax filings for free. A few cousins let out soft, uncomfortable chuckles. Vivian didn't look at me. She just smiled and took a slow sip of her wine. My cheeks burned red under the bright light of the chandelier. I squeezed my hands together in my lap, staring at the gray gravy on my plate. I bit my inside lip, refusing to let a single tear fall in front of Arthur. Then, I felt a movement next to me. A hand reached out under the heavy linen tablecloth and found mine. The fingers were thin, cold, and the skin felt like dry paper. It was my grandmother, Beatrice. She was 83 then, and the pancreatic cancer was already stealing her weight. But her grip on my hand was incredibly tight, almost painful. I looked up from my plate and turned my head toward her. Beatrice was staring directly at Arthur at the head of the table. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes held a fierce, burning anger that I had never seen before. She wasn't looking at her son-in-law with disappointment. She was looking at him with absolute fury. Arthur caught her gaze and quickly shifted his attention to pouring more wine for Uncle Richard. Beatrice didn't say a single word to the table that night. She just kept her eyes locked on Arthur until he looked away a second time. Then, she leaned slightly toward me, her cold shoulder pressing against mine. "Don't eat their garbage, Cassandra," she whispered so quietly that only I could hear. "They are measuring the wrong things." I didn't understand the full weight of her grip under the table that night. I didn't know that this specific moment of casual cruelty in front of 20 witnesses would change everything. I didn't know that Beatrice had made a final, executive decision right there at the dinner table. 3 months later, she called her personal attorney to her bedside. She was ready to rewrite the entire Hayes empire, and she was using her own ink. In the summer of 2022, I graduated from UMass Boston. It wasn't an Ivy League school, so Arthur didn't attend the ceremony. That same month, he hired me at Hayes Infrastructure Group as a records clerk. My starting salary was $42,000 a year. 2 days later, Vivian joined the company as the director of planning strategy. Her starting salary was $280,000 plus performance bonuses. My workspace was a windowless copy room on the basement floor. It smelled like heavy industrial toner and hot paper all day long. The massive Xerox machine rumbled and vibrated constantly, shaking the metal desk where I sat. Arthur's top executives never bothered to learn my name. They just tossed manila folders onto my desk and told me to scan them into the system. "Make sure you index these by 5 o'clock, girl," the vice president told me, not even looking at my face. I didn't argue, and I didn't complain. Instead, I used my time in that basement to do exactly what Grandma Beatrice had taught me. Every time I scanned a contract, I didn't just look at the words, I looked at the system beneath the paperwork. Because of my spatial disorientation, I couldn't understand maps, but I could see data structures. I bought a pack of black Sharpies and cheap grid notebooks from the CVS down the street. Whenever Arthur and his project managers argued about subcontractor deals in the hallway, I listened. They thought the hum of the copy machine drowned out their voices. It didn't. I began sketching massive diagrams of the company's financial relationships in my notebooks. I drew lines connecting the parent company to the concrete suppliers and the steel vendors. I mapped out the flow of money, the dates of the bids, and the hidden operational overhead. Arthur often walked past the copy room door with Vivian, point to her charts, and talk loudly. "Look at this revenue projection Vivian designed," Arthur told a board member right outside my door. "That is Ivy League brilliance right there." Vivian laughed, holding her leather portfolio tightly. "Thanks, Dad. I learned from the best," she said. They never stepped inside my room. They had no idea that their brilliant projections were full of holes. By year 2, My diagrams revealed massive operational errors in the state highway bids. Arthur's senior estimators were missing millions of dollars in material delays because they only looked at spreadsheets. I saw the structural lag because I looked at the system as an architecture. But I kept my mouth shut this time. I knew Arthur would just tell me I was being dramatic or trying to compete with Vivian. So I kept feeding the system, filing the records, and watching the patterns grow. One rainy Thursday afternoon, Arthur walked into the basement holding a stack of old files. He didn't hand them to me. He just threw them into the large recycling bin near my desk. "Shred these before you leave tonight, Cassandra," he said, checking his watch. "They are old project agreements from Beatrice's era that we don't need anymore." He turned and walked out before I could answer. I waited until the elevator doors closed upstairs. Then, I pulled the files out of the bin. They were original land deeds and asset allocations from 1974, signed in Beatrice's thick blue ink. I ran them through the scanner, but as the data appeared on my monitor, my hand went cold. The cash flows didn't align with the company's main ledger. Arthur wasn't just clearing out old space. He was quietly transferring ownership of 3 major equipment yards in South Boston. These yards were Beatrice's personal assets, the ones that generated millions in lease revenue. But according to the shell company agreements attached to the back, Arthur was moving them. He was assigning the deeds to an entity called VH, Holdings LLC. VH stood for Vivian Hayes. Arthur was stripping the core assets away from the main company holdings where the board could see them. He was hiding them in a private shell company to ensure Vivian had an unassailable financial cushion before she even took the CEO chair. He was clearing the table for his golden child, and he was using my hands to shred the evidence. I didn't turn on the paper shredder that night. I placed the original deeds into my bag and walked out of the building. The spring rain was cold against my face as I walked toward the subway. Arthur thought I was just a slow clerk who couldn't read a profit margin. He didn't know I had just mapped his entire shell game on a single sheet of CVS grid paper. The spring was winding down, and the trap was slowly turning. The email arrived on a casual Tuesday afternoon, right at 3:14 p.m. I was in the middle of replacing the toner cartridge in the basement copier. My phone buzzed in my jeans pocket. The subject line read, "Position restructuring, confidential." "Dear Miss Hayes, as part of our ongoing organizational optimization, your current position will be eliminated, effective immediately." The words swam, rearranged, and settled back into that same cold sentence. They were firing me. They didn't even have the decency to call me into an office. It was an automated message from a corporate HR software template. I sat there on a stack of printer paper boxes, my hands stained with black ink. My studio apartment in Quincy cost $1,800 a month. I shared it with 2 roommates, and my bank account had exactly $412 left. If I lost this $42,000 a year job, I would be packing my bags within 30 days. But I didn't pack my desk right away. I waited. By 8:00 p.m., the main office upstairs was completely empty, dead quiet. The janitor's cart rumbled somewhere far down the hall. I walked up to the executive suite to organize the project files Arthur had demanded before the layoff notice. The glowing blue light from my computer screen reflected off the dark windows, casting a cold shadow across my face. Suddenly, I heard heavy footsteps approaching Arthur's corner office. The door swung shut, but the drywall separating my cubicle from his desk was thin. I heard Arthur's voice clearly through the wall. "We can't have her sitting in the basement when Vivian takes over next month," Arthur said, his voice sharp and impatient. "It looks completely unprofessional. The board is already auditing our administrative overhead. What if an investor asks why the CEO's older sister is working as a low-level file clerk? They will start asking questions about why she isn't in leadership, why we never promoted her. They'll find out she's the way she is. that she can't even navigate a basic highway map without freezing up. I stood perfectly still, my palm pressed flat against the cold, dry wall. Then my mother, Eleanor, spoke. Her voice was soft, casual, the same tone she used when she called to cancel our dinner plans. "We've done everything we could for her, Arthur," Eleanor said, letting out a small sigh. "Some children just don't have what it takes to carry the family name." "Exactly," Arthur barked, his desk drawer slamming shut. "She needs to go before the press coverage for Vivian's appointment starts. We'll give her a standard 2-week severance package, and she can find something else. Something more suited to her limited abilities." I pulled my hand away from the wall. The coldness didn't hurt anymore. It didn't make my chest tight. And my eyes stayed completely dry. Instead, a strange, absolute silence settled into my bones, like winter frost. For 28 years, I had carried a heavy weight of guilt. I had stayed small, easy, and agreeable because I thought my condition was a burden to them. I thought if I worked hard enough in the dark, they would eventually see my worth. But hearing Eleanor say, "We've done everything we could for her," changed the entire system in my head. That single sentence from my mother was the ultimate twist. It wasn't a knife. It was a master key that unlocked my cage. They hadn't failed to see me. They had actively chosen to erase me to make the family picture look perfect. I was no longer their daughter. I was just an asset they were writing off as a loss. And if they were treating this like a corporate restructuring, I was going to use their own manual. Vivian's massive graduation gala at the Langham Hotel was tomorrow night. Arthur had spent $60,000 on the ballroom alone to introduce his new heir to the Boston elite. I reached into my bag, pulled out my CVS notebook, and looked at the diagram of Arthur's shell companies. "You want me to go?" I whispered to the empty office. "Fine. But I'm taking my grandmother's empire with me." I shut down my computer, grabbed my coat, and walked toward the elevators. I didn't need their permission to leave anymore. The grand ballroom at the Langham Hotel was blindingly bright. 350 elite guests filled the gilded room. Crystal chandeliers cast heavy, prismatic light across the silk tablecloths. A 12-piece orchestra played jazz numbers in the corner. This was Arthur Hayes' kingdom, his ultimate stage. I stood near the heavy entrance doors, adjusting the hem of my dress. It was a simple black dress, $79 from Zara. It was the most I could afford on my file clerk salary. Every other woman in that room glittered in designer gowns and heavy diamonds. My mother, Eleanor, intercepted me before I could even take 5 steps into the room. Her gaze traveled from my drugstore makeup down to my cheap, scuffed heels, her lips pressed into a thin, disappointed line. "You couldn't find anything nicer for your sister's big night, Cassandra?" she muttered. "This is what I have, Mom," I said flatly. Eleanor adjusted her diamond-encrusted bracelet, looking irritated. "You will be sitting at table 27 near the back service entrance," she whispered. "Try your best not to draw attention to yourself tonight. And Cassandra, keep your mouth shut about being let go from the archives. Tonight is Vivian's night, and I won't have you ruining it with your resentment. Don't embarrass us in front of Arthur's investors." She turned her back and walked away before I could respond. Table 27 was tucked completely in the dark, partially hidden behind a massive marble pillar. The ice water from the kitchen setup constantly rattled right behind my chair. My table mates were distant cousins who hadn't spoken to me in 8 years. From my seat, I had a clear view of the main illuminated stage, a massive, 6-foot portrait of Vivian in her Princeton academic regalia hung center stage. The silver banner above it read, "Congratulations, Vivian Hayes, Princeton class of 2026. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the orchestra stopped playing, and the room lights dimmed. A bright spotlight illuminated the center podium where Arthur stood. He raised his heavy crystal champagne flute, wearing his corporate authority like a second skin. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us to celebrate an extraordinary young woman. Arthur's voice boomed. The crowd immediately erupted into polite applause. Vivian graduated top 5% of her Princeton class. She completed her elite transit internship with the state board. And last month, she made senior advisor track at the firm in record time. But tonight, I'm not just celebrating her academic milestones. Tonight, I am officially announcing the future of the Hayes legacy. Arthur gestured toward the side stairs, and Vivian joined him on stage, radiant in a green designer dress. Effective immediately, Vivian Hayes will inherit my entire corporate estate upon my retirement. This includes our family residence in Beacon Hill, currently valued at $13 million, a new custom Porsche Taycan, and most importantly, the position of CEO of Hayes Infrastructure Group. The ballroom absolutely exploded. People gave them a thunderous standing ovation, and camera flashes lit up the front rows. 350 people were cheering, clapping, and raising their glasses. Not a single person glanced back toward the dark corner at table 27. The distant cousin sitting beside me leaned over, her voice dripping with fake pity. "You're Cassandra, right? So, what does this inheritance announcement mean for you?" I opened my mouth, then closed it slowly. What could I possibly say to her? That my father had just formally erased my existence to 350 industry moguls? That the termination letter sitting in my email inbox was just his way of cleaning the floor for his favorite? That every fear I ever had about being completely worthless had just been confirmed on a public stage? On stage. Vivian hugged Arthur tightly, smiling perfectly for the press. The applause began to die down as people returned to their dessert plates. Suddenly, I noticed a silver-haired man moving through the crowded tables. He was walking slowly, deliberately, straight toward the back of the ballroom. He stopped right behind my chair at table 27. Up close, I could see deep set, knowing eyes and the strict posture of a veteran estate lawyer. "Miss Cassandra Hayes?" he said quietly. "Yes, that's me," I said, straightening my blazer. He pulled a thick, cream-colored business card from his breast pocket and handed it to me. The gold text read, "Harrison Vance, Attorneys at Law." "I was your grandmother Beatrice's personal attorney," he whispered. My heart stopped, and the air left my lungs. "Beatrice passed away years ago, Mr. Vance," I managed to say. "I am well aware." "Cassandra," he said, his face completely serious. "But she left something heavy in my office vault with very specific instructions on when to deliver it." From inside his tailored jacket, Harrison Vance produced a thick, heavy cream envelope. It was sealed with dark red wax, bearing an official state notary stamp dated September 2019. "What is this?" I asked, my hands starting to tremble. "It is her true will. Cassandra, the real one. The one your father Arthur doesn't know exists." I stared at the red wax seal, my mind spinning into overdrive. Harrison Vance glanced toward the stage where Arthur and Vivian were still basking in the media flashes. "Your grandmother told me to deliver this document only on the exact day your father publicly disinherited you. I believe that event just occurred. If you have ever been underestimated by the people who were supposed to protect you, I want to hear your voice. If you know what it feels like to be completely dismissed by your own family, type the word enough in the comments section below. Let me know that I am not the only one who had to sit at the back table. And if you want to see the exact moment the Hayes Empire began to fracture, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now. We are just getting started." My hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the heavy paper envelope. Harrison Vance gave me one long look, then nodded toward the side exit. I pushed through the heavy metal fire door, stepping into the back service hallway. The air out here smelled like garbage bags, burnt coffee, and floor bleach. Harsh fluorescent neon lights buzzed loudly overhead, casting a sickly green glow on the concrete floor. Behind the thick door, the orchestra's rendition of Gershwin sounded muffled and completely distorted. I leaned my back against the cold wall, my breath coming in short, ragged gasps. I broke the hard red wax seal with my thumb, tearing the thick cream paper. Inside were 3 pages of heavy legal bond paper with a certified court stamp at the top. The date was typed in bold black ink, September 12th, 2019. My eyes blurred, but I forced the swimming letters to lock into place. I, Beatrice Vance, being of sound mind and memory, do hereby revoke all prior wills. The text began. I skipped down to the primary distribution clause, and my heart slammed against my ribs. To my beloved granddaughter, Cassandra Hayes, I bequeath 51% of my shares in Hayes Infrastructure Group, LLC, 51%, controlling interest. Arthur Hayes only owned 41%. The rest belonged to outside minority board directors. The document continued, and the words felt like hot iron in my chest. This bequest is made with full knowledge of how my son-in-law, Arthur, has systematically diminished Cassandra. Cassandra is not slow, nor is she incapable of leading this family's legacy. She was abandoned by her father's pride and blinded by his narrow definition of intelligence. I will not allow his prejudice to destroy what I built from a single construction trailer in 1968. A massive sob caught in my throat, choking me. Grandma Beatrice had seen every single thing. She had known what they were doing to me while she sat quietly in her Beacon Hill armchair. But then, my thumb flipped to the final page, and the cold reality hit me. There was a strict emergency condition typed at the very bottom. To activate this testamentary bequest, Cassandra Hayes must formally submit a request for an emergency board meeting within 72 hours of receiving this file. Failure to file the request within this 96-hour window will render this document completely null and void. 72 hours. The clock was already ticking. The service door opened, and Harrison Vance stepped into the neon-lit hallway. "You read the deadline clause," he said, his voice flat and clinical. "Why would she do this?" "Mr. Vance?" I asked, my voice cracking against the buzzing lights. "Why give me a 72-hour trap?" Vance adjusted his silver cufflinks and leaned against the railing. "Your grandmother knew how Arthur operates." "Cassandra," he said quietly, "she knew that if she gave you a month, you would talk yourself out of fighting. You would stay quiet to keep the peace, just like you always have. The 72-hour window isn't a punishment from Beatrice. It's your legal permission to walk away from their table." He checked his gold watch. "The deadline falls exactly at 8:30 p.m. on May 18th, he said. "If you want to claim your grandmother's seat, you need 3 board signatures on that petition by tomorrow night." I looked through the small glass window of the fire door. Arthur was still standing near the front stage, laughing with a city commissioner. Eleanor was adjusting Vivian's emerald dress, smiling for a Boston Globe photographer. If I used this document, I would blow up my entire family structure. Arthur would call me an ungrateful snake, and Eleanor would never speak to me again. But if I stayed silent, I would be agreeing to my own execution notice. I would spend the rest of my life living as the slow file clerk who couldn't navigate her own life. "How do I open the box? Mr. Vance?" I asked suddenly, my mind clicking into place. "The cedar box Grandma gave me years ago. The brass lock won't open." Vance paused, a tiny smile flickering in his sharp eyes. "Beatrice told me the code is the key to the system. Cassandra," he said, "think about the numbers she made you read on those old 1968 blueprints." The blueprints. The Interstate 95 expansion project. The exact coordinates of the first equipment yard Grandma built in South Boston. And the date she passed away? The numbers weren't an arbitrary mathematical code. They were the foundational coordinates of the company itself, mixed with her final calendar day. The code to the box was right there in my CVS notebook, drawn inside my network system diagrams. I need to go home, I told Vance, gripping the cream envelope tightly against my chest. I'm filing the board petition tomorrow morning. Vance held open the heavy service exit for me. I will have the legal paperwork ready by 9. Miss Hayes, he said, let's see if Arthur is ready for an audit. I sat on my bed with my legs crossed, staring at the old cedar box on my lap. The damp midnight air of my cheap apartment made the wood smell strong. Outside my window, the Quincy subway trains rumbled by every 10 minutes, shaking the glass pane. I pulled out my CVS notebook and opened the diagram of the company holdings. The combination numbers weren't a math puzzle. They were dates and data coordinates. I turned the 4 scratched brass dials to the exact year of the South Boston Yard expansion and Grandma's final calendar day. The lock clicked open with a heavy, sharp snap. Inside the box lay a handwritten letter, an original partnership document from 1968, and a sleek black USB drive. I plugged the drive into my old laptop, and my eyes locked onto the screen. It contained an audio file labeled Board Session March 14th, 2018. I pressed play, and Arthur's voice filled my cramped room, cold and calculating. Beatrice is getting too old to understand our modern infrastructure contracts, my father said on the recording. I am moving to strip her voting rights and force her off the executive board. It was time-stamped, recorded legal evidence of a corporate coup attempt. I grabbed a blue dry erase marker and went straight to the large window overlooking the street. I began sketching the full board matrix directly onto the glass pane. 12 board members, 12 shares of corporate power. Arthur held 41%. But to activate Grandma's 51% will, I needed a legal emergency petition. That meant I had to get 3 board directors to sign the request within my 72-hour window. At 6:30 a.m. on Wednesday morning, I called Marcus Thorne. He was the senior board director, a man who had poured concrete with my grandmother back in 1970. His phone rang twice before his raspy voice answered. Cassandra, he said, sounding tired but sharp. Vance told me you broke the sap seal on the envelope. I have the true will. Mr. Thorne, I said, looking at my marker-stained window. And I have the 2018 meeting files. There was a long silence on the line, just the sound of him drinking coffee. Arthur has been running this company like a personal dictatorship for 5 years, Thorne said flatly. He screams at contractors, he doctors budget overruns, and he forces bad project bids through closed sessions. The board directors are terrified of his temper, but they are also completely sick of his arrogance. We have been waiting for a legal spark to audit his books. Cassandra, if you have Beatrice's signature, you have the numbers to break his grip. My chest tightened with a sudden wave of adrenaline. Can you get the other directors to sign the emergency meeting request? I asked. I can get Richard Holloway and Susan Parker, Thorne said instantly. They both hate his gut. I will handle the paperwork delivery by tonight. But you need to prepare yourself. Girl, Arthur will try to chew you up and spit you out before you can even sit down in that room. I've spent 4 years in his copy room. Mr. Thorne, I said, my voice dropping. I'm not afraid of his noise anymore. Thorne let out a short, genuine laugh through the speakerphone. The emergency board meeting is set for Friday morning, 10 o'clock, Hayes Tower, he said. By Thursday evening, the legal petition was officially filed into the corporate registry. I was sitting at my small kitchen table eating a bowl of cold noodles when my phone lit up. The caller ID read, Vivian Hayes, I answered, and my sister's voice cut through the line, tight with pure, icy anger. What exactly do you think you're doing, Cassandra? Vivian barked. Not even saying hello. Dad just received an automated corporate alert from the board secretary. Thorne and Parker filed an emergency session directive for tomorrow morning. It's just standard corporate governance. Vivian, I said, keeping my pulse steady. Don't play these stupid games with me, she hissed, her perfect Princeton composure completely gone. You work in the basement filing cabinet room. Cassandra, you copy blueprints. You fetch black coffee, and you get lost trying to find the parking lot entrance. You can't even read an internal balance sheet without freezing up. If this is some pathetic revenge stunt because of Dad's inheritance speech at the Langham, you are making a massive mistake. You are going to walk into that boardroom tomorrow and completely humiliate yourself in front of the directors. I looked at the window where my marker diagrams showed exactly how Arthur had shifted Grandma's South Boston deeds. I didn't yell at her, and I didn't tremble. I'm just doing my job. Vivian, I said flatly, using her own favorite phrase. I'll see you at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning. She slammed the phone down, cutting the line. I shut my laptop, tucked the 3 printed copies of Grandma's will into my leather portfolio, and stared at the streetlights outside. For 28 years, they had assumed my silence was a sign of weakness. Tomorrow, they were going to find out it was just a record log. Friday morning arrived, gray and heavy with New England fog. The elevator doors opened directly onto the 42nd floor of Hayes Tower. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over a blurry Boston skyline. Everything out here was polished Italian marble and expensive corporate opulence. I stepped out onto the floor, pulling at the sleeves of a gray blazer I had borrowed from my roommate. I held my leather portfolio tight against my ribs, my fingers pressing through the cheap cardboard. The security guard standing outside the heavy double-glass doors of the boardroom instantly held up his hand. Name? He asked, checking his corporate company tablet. Cassandra Hayes? I said clearly. The guard frowned, running his finger down the digital grid list. You are not on the authorized attendee registry for this session. Ma'am, he said coldly. This is a restricted high-level director meeting. Is there an administrative problem out here? A sharp voice barked behind him. The door swung open, and Vivian stepped into the marble hallway, looking completely immaculate. She wore a navy designer power suit and a silk scarf, the perfect uniform of someone who belonged in boardrooms. Her eyes landed on my face, and her corporate smile didn't even pretend to reach her temples. Cassandra, she said, letting out a sharp, performative laugh. What exactly do you think you are doing up here? I have confidential information to present to the board directors, I said, keeping my posture straight. Vivian scoffed, crossing her arms tightly. Information about what? She said, her voice dripping with pure condescension. You work in the basement copy room scanning old blueprints? You don't even know what our basic operational overhead looks like. Before I could answer, my father, Arthur Hayes, appeared at the end of the hallway flanked by 2 senior vice presidents. He checked his gold Rolex, his face instantly twisting into pure irritation when he saw me. What is this circus? Arthur barked, his voice carrying that heavy boardroom authority. Cassandra, go back down to your desk in the archive records room. This high-level corporate session does not concern you at all. Actually, Arthur, a dry voice called out from inside the room. It does. Marcus Thorne appeared in the doorway, his silver hair catching the bright hallway lights. I invited her up here, Thorne told my father flatly. She has legal standing to address the board directors of this company. Arthur's jaw tightened, his veins bulging slightly against his crisp white collar. Fine, Arthur hissed, his voice turning into ice as he pushed past the security guard. Let her speak. We'll see how many minutes it takes before she completely embarrasses herself in front of the partners. The boardroom was an enormous room with a massive oval table made of polished walnut wood. 12 heavy leather chairs were occupied by the board directors. Arthur took his seat at the absolute head of the table, with Vivian sitting right to his side like an heir apparent. I was directed to a single chair at the far end of the room, the children's table of corporate governance. Directly above the stone fireplace behind me hung a large oil portrait of my grandmother, Beatrice Vance. Her painted silver-haired image seemed to watch over the entire room. Robert Hartley, the distinguished board chairman, tapped his pen against a legal pad to call the meeting to order. This emergency session was requested by Marcus Thorne, Richard Holloway, and Susan Parker. Hartley read. Marcus, you have the floor. Thorne stood up immediately, gesturing toward my end of the long table. The matter concerns a certified document that has recently come to light, affecting our entire ownership structure. Thorne said, I yield my time to Cassandra Hayes. All 12 board directors turned their heads toward me. Vivian smirked, leaning back in her leather chair with pure boredom. Arthur stood up from his seat, buttoning his tailored suit jacket with deliberate slowness. Before we waste the board's valuable operational time, Robert, Arthur said, his tone patronizingly warm, I need to provide some critical medical context about my daughter. Arthur, Marcus Thorne interrupted. Let her speak. Cassandra is my daughter, Marcus, and I love her. But she is completely unqualified to address this company, Arthur said loudly. She has an administrative role, zero financial background, and no strategic infrastructure experience. Vivian chimed in immediately, her voice dripping with artificial family sympathy. Cassandra also suffers from severe spatial disorientation and panic attacks. Vivian told the directors, she struggles to read basic technical grids and can't even navigate a subway route without freezing. We've tried our best to support her, but some limitations simply cannot be overcome with family effort. A few board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats, looking down at their folders. What we are seeing here, Arthur continued, smiling tightly at the room, is a troubled young woman acting out. Sibling jealousy is a powerful thing, and after my inheritance announcement at the Langham Gala, Mr. Hayes. Robert Hartley's voice cut through the room like a heavy legal gavel. You will have your opportunity to respond to the board, but Miss Hayes requested this session, and she is entitled to it. Arthur sat back down hard, his face darkening with absolute fury. Vivian caught my eye from across the polished walnut table and mouthed the words, You are embarrassing yourself. I looked directly at my father and my sister, feeling a cold, absolute clarity wash over my bones. They weren't trying to protect the company. They were just trying to defend their perfect corporate story. Thank you, Mr. Hartley, I said, my voice holding perfectly steady as I stood up. I won't be discussing my orientation difficulties today. I will be discussing this document. I opened my portfolio, pulled out the heavy cream envelope, and held up the pages. This is the last will and testament of Beatrice Vance, founder of Hayes Infrastructure Group, notarized September 12th, 2019. Arthur's face instantly drained of every single drop of color, turning a pasty gray. That is impossible. Arthur's voice came out strangled and cracked. My mother-in-law's estate will was fully executed in 2015. I have the certified file copy right here in my executive records. You have a copy of her previous will. Father, I said, keeping my voice clinical and flat. Under Massachusetts law, a subsequent valid will automatically revokes all prior estate documents. This will was executed 4 years after the file you possess. I slid the heavy document down the polished walnut table toward Robert Hartley. Mr. Vance. I gestured to the back corner. Harrison Vance stood up, stepping forward into the light of the windows. I am Harrison Vance, senior partner at Vance & Associates, he announced to the directors. I served as Beatrice Vance's personal estate attorney until her death. I can confirm this will was executed in my presence on September 12th, 2019. The original document is held in secure escrow at Chase Private Client. Robert Hartley put on his reading glasses and studied the signatures, his eyebrows rising sharply. This document bequeaths 51% of Hayes Infrastructure Group shares to you. Miss Hayes, Hartley said. A sudden murmur of shock rippled around the long table. That is a pathetic forgery, Vivian yelled, but her voice had completely lost its Ivy League confidence. It is not a forgery, Miss Hayes. Harrison Vance snapped back immediately. And I would strongly advise you against making public accusations of fraud without a shred of evidence. Arthur slammed his heavy palm down onto the walnut table, rattling the water glasses. This is absurd, my father shouted, his voice shaking. Beatrice was ill in 2019. She was being completely manipulated by her staff. Manipulated? I said, pulling my old phone out of my blazer pocket. Perhaps you would like to explain this to the directors then. I pressed the digital screen, and Arthur's audio file from the USB drive filled the silent room. Beatrice is 81 years old. My father's recorded voice boomed through the speakers. She doesn't understand modern business infrastructure. I am moving a resolution to reduce her voting shares to 10% so I can take full control of the project bids. The audio file ended, and the silence that followed it was absolute. Arthur sat frozen in his leather chair, his face turning a mottled, bruised purple under the bright boardroom lights. Vivian's jaw dropped as she looked at her father, her perfect corporate composure cracking into pieces. I let the quiet hang over the table for 5 full seconds, looking straight at Arthur's trembling hands. The truth has an excellent version history. Father, I said flatly. The board's corporate legal counsel, a thin man named Patterson, stepped back to the table. He whispered something directly into Robert Hartley's ear. Hartley's expression flickered from deep surprise to total resignation. Please take your seats. Everyone, Hartley announced, checking his notes. The board directors filed back to their chairs, and the tension became incredibly brittle. Our legal team has fully confirmed the documentation, Hartley read aloud. The 2019 will presented by Miss Cassandra Hayes is completely valid under state law. It officially supersedes all previous testamentary files. Effective immediately, Cassandra Hayes holds 51% of Hayes Infrastructure Group shares. Someone near the windows inhaled sharply through their teeth. Additionally, Hartley continued, looking up at me. As majority shareholder, Miss Hayes has the legal right to propose corporate motions, including matters of executive leadership. He paused, letting the weight of his words hit the room. Miss Hayes, do you have a motion you wish to bring forward? I stood up immediately, my heart pounding hard against my ribs, but my voice held perfectly steady. I have one motion, I said, locking my eyes onto Arthur's pasty gray face. Arthur scrambled to his feet, his chair legs scraping violently against the marble floor. Robert, this is absolute nonsense. Sit down, Arthur, Hartley said, his voice carrying unexpected steel. Miss Hayes has the floor right now. My father sat back down, his face transitioning from a bruised purple to an ash-gray color, like cold coal. Vivian stared at her legal pad, her knuckles white as she gripped her expensive pen. I looked around the oval table at 12 people who had ignored my existence for 4 full years. The power to completely destroy Arthur's career was resting entirely in my ink-stained hands. I thought about what Grandma Beatrice would want for the legacy she built from nothing. I am not proposing to terminate Arthur Hayes as CEO today, I announced clearly. The tension in the room shifted instantly. Vivian's head snapped up, and even Marcus Thorne looked slightly surprised across the table. Arthur blinked at me, a confused, desperate calculation beginning to enter his eyes. What I'm proposing, I continued, is a formal vote of no confidence, per Section 14.3 of our 1968 corporate bylaws. The board directors will decide whether Arthur Hayes retains their trust to run this infrastructure network. This isn't a revenge fantasy, Vivian, I said, looking straight at my sister's brittle expression. This is standard corporate governance. If father actually has the board's confidence, he has absolutely nothing to worry about in this room. Robert Hartley studied me for a long moment, a genuine flicker of respect appearing in his eyes. Is there a second for this motion? Hartley asked the room. Seconded, Marcus Thorne said without a single second of hesitation. Then we will vote, Hartley declared, raising his black pen. All those expressing confidence in Arthur Hayes as CEO, please raise your hands. 4 hands went up slowly. Arthur's old allies. All those expressing no confidence, Hartley said. 7 hands rose instantly into the bright light of the boardroom windows. Hartley counted the grid twice, then set his pen down on the desk. The motion carries, 7-4, with 1 abstention, Hartley announced, turning his head toward the head of the table. Mr. Hayes, the board has voted no confidence. Per our bylaws, you have exactly 30 days to tender your formal resignation. Arthur said nothing. He just sat there frozen, looking at me like I was a total stranger. But then came the final twist that he never saw coming. I turned to Robert Hartley and raised my hand one last time. As the majority shareholder, I am appointing Marcus Thorne as interim CEO during our transition search. I said, I am not taking the executive chair. I am returning to my archive files to clean out the system data. From the ground up. Arthur's mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He finally realized I didn't want his crown. I just wanted his ledger to be honest. He had spent 28 years trying to make me disappear, and now he had to walk out of the room first. Arthur caught me in the private corridor, right outside the boardroom doors. My mother, Eleanor, was standing right beside him, her face completely covered in tear-streaked mascara. Someone must have sent her a panicked text message during our legal board recess. You absolute snake, Arthur hissed, his hands shaking violently as he stepped into my path. You ungrateful, scheming little Arthur, stop it. Not out here where the staff can hear, Eleanor whispered, grabbing his arm tightly. She turned her wet eyes toward me, her voice cracking with pure corporate betrayal. How could you do this to your own father? Cassandra, she sobbed, dabbing her face with a ruined tissue. You just completely destroyed our entire family dynamic in front of 12 strangers. I didn't destroy anything. Mom, I said, holding my ground against his red face. I just let the documentation speak. The documentation? Arthur laughed bitterly, checking his gold Rolex like it could save his title. Your grandmother Beatrice was sick. She was mentally unfit. And you manipulated her lawyer. Grandma Beatrice wrote that will because she watched you try to rob her of her voting power in 2018. I said flatly. You didn't lose your infrastructure company because I betrayed you. Father, you lost it because you betrayed her first, and you used my basement copy room to hide the shell deeds. Eleanor took a step closer, her Chanel perfume mixing with the sour smell of Arthur's sweat. We were only trying to protect you all these years, Cassandra. You've always struggled so much, she pleaded. You didn't protect me. Mom, I said. 28 years of complete silence crystallizing into cold words. You erased me from every single family photo. You mocked my spatial disorientation at Christmas, and you threw my files in the recycling bin to clear the floor for Vivian. That is completely unfair, Eleanor gasped, looking toward the elevator bank. No, what wasn't fair was sitting at table 27 while you gave my grandmother's empire away, I said. I pressed the silver elevator button, and the heavy metal doors slid open instantly. We are going to contest that 2019 will in court. Cassandra! Arthur yelled as I stepped inside. You'll lose, I said flatly, looking straight at his trembling gray face. And you know it. The brushed steel elevator doors closed slowly right on his purple face, cutting off his shout. I leaned against the wall, finally allowing myself to take one deep, unobstructed breath. The social and corporate fallout across the Boston elite rippled outward within 72 hours. Arthur signed his formal executive resignation letter under board pressure 3 weeks later. Major transit investment partners requested meetings with Marcus Thorne, completely bypassing my father. The Hayes name, which had opened every door in Beacon Hill, suddenly carried a massive corporate asterisk. Arthur and Eleanor canceled their front row seats at the Boston Symphony Gala, citing sudden health reasons. 3 weeks after the board vote, I agreed to meet Vivian at Boston Common. The heavy summer heat was pressing down on the park, and swan boats idled in the pond nearby. My sister sat on a wooden bench, looking completely different from her Langham Gala performance. Her perfect Princeton armor had cracked. She wore no makeup, and her hair was tied back carelessly. I've been going to a behavioral therapist 3 times a week since the Hayes Tower session, Vivian said without looking at me. That's good, I said, watching a squirrel chase a peanut on the gravel path. It's completely brutal, she said, letting out a short, humorless laugh. Turns out being Arthur's golden child wasn't a corporate gift, Cassandra. It was just a gilded cage. She stared at the water, her voice cracking as she clutched her leather bag. Dad expected perfect metrics every single hour, and if I defended your archive work, I became his target too. I'm not asking for your inheritance shares, and I'm sorry I stayed oblivious for so long, she whispered. We sat in a long, quiet silence, 2 sisters who had lived under the same roof as total strangers. I can't go back to the old family script, Vivian, I said, standing up from the wooden bench. But I'm not interested in staying your corporate enemy either. Maybe we start writing our own pages from scratch. Vivian looked up at me, her eyes filling with real, unchoreographed tears as she gave a small nod. It wasn't a perfect family reconciliation, but it was an honest start. 6 months have passed since that emergency board meeting. I just moved into my own 1-bedroom apartment in Back Bay. The brick building is old, pre-war, and the living room window overlooks the Charles River. Right now, a New England autumn sunset is turning the river water into a heavy, glowing gold leaf. My new salary as the Director of Sustainable Development and Asset Restoration is $185,000 a year. Plus, I receive my quarterly dividend payouts as the majority shareholder of Hayes Infrastructure Group. I don't spend my mornings in the dark basement copy room smelling like industrial printer toner anymore. I clean my own apartment every Saturday morning using a basic lemon vinegar spray I mix myself. The sharp citrus scent keeps me grounded, reminding me exactly where my system diagram started. Arthur calls my personal cell phone exactly once a month now. Our conversations last maybe 3 minutes, mostly talking about the Boston weather or subway delays. We both pretend the 42nd floor Fay Truot vote never happened, because it's simply easier for his ego. Eleanor and I meet for a quick lunch every other week at a small, neutral coffee shop in Midtown. She is slowly learning how to ask me real questions about my archiving projects instead of treating me like a problem. It's not a perfect mother-daughter relationship, but it's completely honest. And that's more than we ever had. On the primary brick wall of my living room, I hung Grandma Beatrice's original painted portrait, the same oil canvas that watched over the walnut boardroom table for 40 long years. When the late afternoon sun hits the oil paint just right, I can see her silver-haired image smiling at me. You did it, Cassandra, I whisper to the quiet room. But sitting here today, I finally hit the ultimate realization about my grandmother's system. Beatrice didn't leave me 51% of her infrastructure company because I was a better child than Vivian. And she didn't give me that 72-hour emergency board deadline as a corporate obstacle course. She put that ticking clock in her will because she knew I had spent 28 years waiting for Arthur to love me. She forced me into a 72-hour corner so I would stop begging for approval and finally claim my own strength. The real inheritance wasn't the $47 million in corporate real estate stock. It was the permission to look into my own mirror and decide my own value by my own damn standard. To anyone watching this tonight, who has been hidden at the back table near the kitchen service doors, stop seeking validation from family members who are completely committed to misunderstanding your worth. You don't need a secret inheritance package from a lawyer to build a boundary around your dignity. Boundaries are not heavy stone walls designed to lock people out. They are secure doors. And you are the only person who holds the security key to decide who gets access to your life and on what terms. If Cassandra's story reminded you that your worth isn't determined by the people who failed to see you, please hit that like button, subscribe to her dignity stories, click the notification bell, and leave a comment sharing your own family boundary journey. If you want more true-to-life stories about ordinary women who found the steel to stand up for themselves, look at the video on your screen right now. Stay tuned for our next episode, where I am going to expose how a manipulative mother tried to steal her eldest daughter's wedding fund to pay off a golden child's secret debt. You won't want to miss the financial audit that broke that family tree wide open next week. Thank you so much for staying with me until the very end. Until next time, remember you always deserve to be chosen first.